Leadership literature is filled with fluffy, superficial content that lacks substance and scientific rigor. Starting this video, I'll introduce a series of what I call the sense of leadership research. I define the sense of leadership research as common theoretical, methodological, and interpretation errors that compromise the integrity, reliability, and applicability of leadership research. They're not just simple missteps, but significant mistakes that threaten to undermine the very foundation of our understanding of leadership. When researchers, whether through oversight or a lapse in judgment, fall prey to the sense, they take misleading paths that lead them away from truth. Their research is cloaked in the guise of scholarly work, but the research is anything but scientifically rigorous. Their findings compromise the integrity, reliability, and most importantly, the real-world applicability of findings in leadership. As I introduce a series of sense of leadership research, my goal is to identify those sense, understand their consequences, challenge the status quo, seek redemption for leadership research, and navigate our way back to the path of scientifically rigorous leadership research. The sense I focus on in this video is conflation of behavior and perception. It was inspired by an article I read recently about the problem with positive leadership style research. Thomas Fisher and his team did not just call it a problem or said they call it a fatal flaw. The full title of the article is A Fatal Flaw, Positive Leadership Style Research Create Causal Illusions. This article was published in the Leadership Quarterly in 2024. While reading this article, I got excited because I sense the same problem but struggle with articulating it and providing evidence to support it. The article has given a voice of the very ideas and frustration I've been carrying around, but haven't quite managed to express. The article gives me a sense of resonance, knowing that what's been swirling in my mind has been so clearly captured and laid out by someone else. Leadership style, defined as a pattern of behavior, seems to have morphed into an ever-growing feel-good cliche. There are so many leadership styles. In the broad field of leadership, we have authentic leadership, charismatic leadership, empowering leadership, servant leadership, ethical leadership, moral leadership, transformational leadership, transactional leadership, mindful leadership, empathetic leadership, destructive leadership, visionary leadership, inspiring leadership, distributed leadership, and many, many more. In a relatively narrow field of educational leadership, in addition to the one I just mentioned, we have instructional leadership, shared instructional leadership, leadership for learning, social justice leadership, cultural responsive school leadership, caring leadership, equity-minded leadership, and anti-racism leadership. It has reached a stage where adding any positive adjective to leadership allows someone to claim a new leadership style, often without presenting empirical evidence to back up its validity as a construct. In this Fatal Flaw article, the author points out a serious issue about how positive leadership styles are conceptualized and measured. Consider 3 positive leadership styles: authentic, ethical, and servant leadership. If you are a researcher who studies these 3 positive leadership styles, what do? The first step is to define the construct. You start by reviewing the existing literature. This is what literature tells you. Authentic leadership draws upon and promotes both positive psychological capacities and a positive ethical climate to foster greater self-awareness, an internalized moral perspective, balanced processing of information, and relational transparency on the part of leaders working with followers, fostering positive self-development. Ethical leadership is the demonstration of normatively appropriate conduct through personal actions and interpersonal relationships, and the promotion of such conduct to followers through two-way communication, reinforcement, and decision-making. Servant leadership focuses on developing employees to their fullest potential in the areas of task effectiveness, community stewardship, self-motivation, and future leadership capacities. Those are theoretical definitions, which are different from operational definitions. A theoretical definition is abstract in nature. It's essentially the conceptual meaning of a term. It establishes the boundaries and the scope of a construct. If we look at theoretical definitions, we can conclude that authentic leadership focuses on genuine leadership behavior that encourages self-development among followers. Ethical leadership focuses on setting moral standards through personal example, two-way communication, and decision-making. And servant leadership focuses on serving employees through developing them to their fullest potential. Although the theoretical definitions of those three positive leadership styles show some overlap, theoretically speaking, they are distinct from each other. How do we know they are truly different leadership styles? We need to translate those abstract theoretical definitions into concrete language. How do we determine if an individual is a servant leader? What would happen if we directly ask someone, are you a servant leader? Are you an ethical leader? Or are you an authentic leader? If a person's response is yes to all three questions, does that mean the three leadership styles are identical? This is where we need operational definitions because they allow us to measure and identify specific behaviors and practices that differentiate one leadership style from another, providing more objective basis for comparison and understanding. In research, we have a very rigorous process to develop operational definitions of a construct. For example, to develop concrete language for servant leadership, Lyddon and his team first identified 9 dimensions of servant leadership based on the existing literature and the previous taxonomies of servant leadership. This is why literature review is a fundamental skill for any researcher. From the existing literature, the researchers identified 9 dimensions that capture a broad range of behaviors and attributes associated with servant leadership: emotional healing, creating value for the community, conceptual skills, empowering, helping subordinates grow and succeed, putting subordinates first, behaving ethically, building relationships, and fostering a spirit of servanthood. But the language of each dimension is still abstract. The second step is to generate survey items of each of the 9 dimensions. For each dimension, you generate a set of potential survey items that reflect the core essence of that dimension. This is a creative process. You translate the abstract language of each dimension into concrete, observable behaviors or attitudes that could be evaluated through self-report or observer report survey items. The survey items are designed to be statements that respondents could agree or disagree with, indicating the extent to which they perceived those behaviors or attributes in their leaders. In the case of servant leadership, the researchers generated 85 survey items across the 9 initially identified dimensions. Now we have something concrete to work with, but we still don't know how accurately those 85 survey items can capture the dimensions that we want to measure, in this case, servant leadership. The third step is to validate the content of the survey item. We can conduct exploratory factor analysis to identify the underlying structure of the servant leadership construct. Based on the result, survey items that did not load strongly on their intended factors or that loaded on multiple factors were re-evaluated and potentially removed or revised. The results led to the emergence of 7 distinct dimensions of servant leadership, reflecting a slightly modified conceptualization of the initial 9 dimensions identified in the existing literature. This steps helps us refine the measurement by ensuring that each survey item uniquely contributes to the measurement of specific dimension of servant leadership. The fourth step is to conduct confirmatory factor analysis to verify the factor structure of servant leadership. Confirmatory factor analysis is a key step in establishing construct validity to show the survey instrument is measuring what is intended to measure. The fifth step is to test discriminant validity, which is to demonstrate that a construct is different from other constructs. In the case of servant leadership, the researchers use regression analysis and hierarchical linear modeling to show that servant leadership is a unique construct that is different from transformational leadership and the leader-member exchange. They use discriminant validity to show that the construct of the servant leadership contributed to explaining certain outcomes, such as organizational citizenship behavior, job performance, and organizational commitment at the individual level and beyond what can be explained by other well-established leadership theories, specifically transformational leadership and leader-member exchange. After following all of those rigorous processes, researchers developed 28 survey items across the 7 dimensions. They are operational definition of servant leadership developed by Lyddon and his team. Of course, different researchers may develop different operational definitions of one construct because operational definitions are influenced by the context in which the research is conducted. Differences in methodological approaches, measurement tools can lead to different interpretations and emphasis on certain aspects of a construct. Regardless, operational definitions of a construct translate abstract language in theoretical definitions into measurable forms, allowing researchers to empirically test hypotheses and constructs. Now that we have operational definitions of 3 constructs, authentic leadership, ethical leadership, and servant leadership, some researchers have tested how they are different from one another. What did they find? First, authentic leadership and ethical leadership were highly correlated with transformational leadership. It means there was a significant theoretical overlap. This finding made us question whether authentic and ethical leadership styles are truly different from transformational leadership. Second, the result of incremental validity suggests that both authentic and ethical leadership styles provide little incremental variance in most outcomes beyond what transformational leadership already explains. This means that the constructs of authentic and ethical leadership styles fail to offer substantial additional insight into leadership effectiveness beyond transformational leadership constructs. By contrast, servant leadership demonstrated a greater ability to explain a wide range of organizational outcomes beyond what's accounted for by transformational leadership. This indicates that servant leadership may be more distinct and potentially valuable, capable of capturing aspects of leadership effectiveness that other leadership styles do not. Now that we have a better understanding of leadership styles, it seems we've got a pretty solid grasp on them, right? But hold on a second. What's the fatal flaw identified by Fisher and his team? When we take a closer look at operational definitions of those leadership styles through the survey items we rely on, something concerning pops up. Have you ever noticed how those survey questions mix together what leaders actually do with how leaders' behaviors are evaluated by their team? For example, a survey item on authentic leadership is my team leader transparently shares information about the organization with the team. It makes you wonder whether we are measuring the leader's behavior here or measuring the followers' subjective evaluations. This is no small matter. Are we measuring leaders' behavior through a clear window or stained glass? The difference here suggests we are actually measuring leadership styles through a lens colored by subjective interpretations. Another example is a survey item used to measure ethical leadership. The survey item is, my leader makes fair decisions. Are we measuring the fairness of the decisions or how fair those decisions seem to the team members? When we conflate leadership behavior with the followers' subjective evaluations into one single measurement, we create causal illusions because it blurs the lines between what leaders actually do and how their behaviors are perceived by others. This conflation can lead to misconceptions about the cause and effect relationship in leadership. When positive outcomes occur in an organization, it's natural for followers to attribute the positive outcomes to their leaders' behaviors, especially if they hold their leaders in high regard. However, this attribution can be misleading if it's solely based on perceptions without considering other contributing factors, such as external conditions, team dynamics, or even luck. By mixing objective behaviors and the followers' subjective evaluations, we risk mistakenly attributing outcomes directly to leadership qualities rather than to a complex interplay of factors. Moreover, followers' positive perceptions of their leaders can lead to an overestimation of the leader's impact on organizational outcomes. If a leader is widely liked or respected, followers may view the organization's success as direct results of the leader's behavior, even when those outcomes are influenced by the efforts of many individuals in that organization. This overestimation can create a misleading narrative about the effectiveness of certain leadership styles. When it comes to research, if research relies heavily on measures that conflate behavior with perception, it becomes challenging to identify what specific leadership behaviors are effective. This can undermine the development of evidence-based leadership training and development programs because it's unclear which behaviors future leaders should demonstrate to replicate success. Distinguishing between behaviors and perceptions is crucial for building a clear, actionable understanding of effective leadership. One more thing, perceptions of leadership are not universal. They can vary widely across different culture and organizational contexts. A behavior considered exemplary in one organization may be viewed differently in another. The same behavior of holding monthly feedback sessions where team members can voice concerns, suggestions, and ideas openly can be seen as exemplary in one organization. But the same behavior may be seen as a sign of indecisiveness or a lack of confidence in the leadership capabilities. By conflating behaviors with perceptions, researchers can reach misleading conclusions that leadership effectiveness does not hold up in diverse settings. And this can limit the generalizability of leadership research and its applicability to diverse contexts. Now, this does not mean that followers' subjective perceptions are not important. Far from it. The way team members view their leaders can significantly influence their motivation and performance. However, when we are scientifically evaluating leadership effectiveness, we need to distinguish between leadership behaviors and how they are evaluated by their followers. Otherwise, we may find ourselves caught in the illusion that leadership style X is the secret sauce of organizational success, when in reality, it's the contextual factors or perhaps other leadership behaviors not captured by our measurement or operational definition are doing the heavy lifting. We need to develop more rigorous, behaviorally anchored measures that can truly advance our understanding of effective leadership, not those feel-good leadership cliche, such as being inspirational, resilient, inclusive, visionary, trust, collaboration, communicate, one size doesn't fit all, etc., etc. One thing I'd like to point out is that the Fatal Flaw article focused only on quantitative research in leadership. In fact, a similar conflation problem exists in qualitative research on leadership as well. In qualitative research, the risk of conflating leadership behaviors with followers' perceptions is particularly high because this type of research often relies on narratives, interviews, and observational data that can be heavily influenced by the respondents' subjective evaluations. Qualitative research is valuable for exploring the depth and the complexity of leadership practices and experiences, offering rich insights into the leadership dynamics that quantitative measures may overlook. However, the interpretive nature of qualitative analysis means that researchers must be vigilant about distinguishing between the objective descriptions of leaders' behaviors and the subjective interpretation or perceptions of those behaviors by followers or observers. In qualitative research, this conflation problem, the fatal flaw, can manifest in different ways. First, interpretation bias. It means researchers tend to analyze and understand data through a lens colored by their personal beliefs, experience, and expectations. This can lead to a skewed representation of research findings, particularly in the study of leadership, where subjective perceptions can significantly influence the interpretation of data. For example, a researcher with a strong belief in the influence of social justice leadership may selectively interpret data that support the efficacy of social justice initiatives, potentially at the expense of downplaying or overlooking evidence that contradicts this perspective. They may predominantly highlight the perceived, not necessarily actual positive outcome of social justice leadership without critically examining its challenges or the context of its application. This interpretation bias can lead to causal illusion, an overrepresentation of success stories without a critical consideration of failures, challenges, and neutral outcomes that provide a more balanced and realistic picture of leadership effectiveness. The second manifestation of the conflation problem in qualitative research is narrative conflation. It takes place when researchers conflate the research participants' narratives, stories, and experiences with their interpretations, rather than distinguishing between the two. In leadership studies, this may mean taking the participants' positive account of a leader's impact at face value without probing deeper into the actual behavior or broader context that may explain the participant's perception. If participants describe a leader as transformational because they feel inspired, researchers may not investigate whether this inspiration translates into tangible outcomes or improved work performance, thereby conflating followers' subjective evaluations with leaders' behaviors. This conflation makes it difficult to separate what leaders actually do from how their behaviors are perceived by others. In qualitative studies, the reliance on self-reporting at the primary data source can exacerbate the conflation problem. Qualitative research on leadership often depends on interviews and personal narratives, where participants provide evaluations of their leadership behavior or those of others. This approach inherently carries the risk of conflating leaders' self-perceptions or followers' perceptions of leadership behavior with actual observable leadership behaviors, leading to potentially biased or inaccurate conclusions. For example, a leader may characterize their approach as highly empathetic based on their intentions and self-assessment. Yet, without external verification or observation, such self-reports may not fully align with experiences or perceptions of their team members. This reminds me of C.S. Lewis' quote, "True humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. If a leader is truly humble, they're not preoccupied with humility as a trait they need to consciously cultivate or demonstrate. Similarly, people with limited knowledge tend to overestimate their own skills, while those with substantial knowledge tend to underestimate their abilities. The more you know, the more you know you don't know. This is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. People with rich knowledge in a subject area are often more aware of the complexities and nuances of that field, including the limitations of their understanding. This awareness can lead to a more cautious approach to claiming expertise. By contrast, those with more superficial understanding may not grasp the extent of what they don't know, leading them to overestimate and more readily display their knowledge. In the context of leadership research, the Dunning-Kruger effect suggests the challenge of relying heavily on self-reports for evaluating positive leadership behavior. Leaders who demonstrate positive leadership behavior may not boast about making overt claims of their leadership behavior. Similarly, followers' evaluation of their leaders' behavior can be influenced by their own levels of understanding and biases, influencing the accuracy of self-reported data. To mitigate the conflation problem in qualitative research, researchers can use multiple data sources and methods to cross-validate findings, engage in critical reflection, continuously question their interpretation and the influence of their own biases on research process, and develop clear theoretical frameworks that guide data analysis by distinguishing between leadership behaviors and followers' subjective evaluations. In this video, I introduce the sin of conflation, where the subjective perceptions of leadership behavior are entangled with the actual objective behaviors of leaders. This conflation blurs the lines between what's truly happening and what we think or feel is happening. To seek redemption, here is my question for you. How do you think we can redeem leadership research from this sin of conflation?